I know. I look tired. It's a week. I wanted to talk about language because, as we know, I care about language. I'm a stickler for language. And recently, a few people who I really love kind of made comments about, like, you don't have to say people with ovaries. You could just say women. And I don't want this to be a whole discussion about trans and gender, because I don't fully understand it, and I don't feel that I'm necessarily the one to be able to inform everyone about it, because I'm learning myself. I'm learning myself about a million things. And as many of you, I like to believe that I am not filled with bias, but I realize that whether I know it or not, we have all been raised with certain amounts of biases that we didn't know. They're not our fault necessarily, but they are our responsibility to recognize and try to rectify when those biases, even if they are subtle, even if they are understandable, even if there is a genuine, innocent reason behind them, when they cause hurt to other people, we should try to rectify them. So I will stand by the fact that I will always say women, and I will also say humans with ovaries, because I want to include everybody. It doesn't mean that I don't myself want to be called a woman. I'm a woman, and I'm very proud of being a woman. And there is absolutely a lot of complications when we talk about women and humans with ovaries, because we're learning and we're changing and we're evolving back to what we probably were before, which is a time where things weren't actually so definably binary. And yes, there's going to be issues with all of this as we try to understand who goes into what bathroom and who wears skirts, and do we have to call them women if they wear a skirt, and all these silly superficial things, and some deeper things when it comes to how are we going to deal with sports, since they've been so divisively between men and women, or how are we going to deal with scholarships that are supposed to go towards women versus men, or how are we going to make sure that women as a minority do have a voice. There are a lot of complications in this. But as a human and as a person and as a woman who has clearly wanted to build a tribe that is as all-inclusive as is possible, I'm really happy to be able to say that I want to include women who define themselves as women and humans with ovaries. And by the way, humans without ovaries. I am a human without ovaries. I have no ovaries. I have no uterus. I have no tubes. I'm still a woman. And you may define yourself as whatever you are. And if you define yourself as someone who, as we say in Tribe Called V, identifies with the V or has a V, then you can be part of our tribe. And identifies with a V is a very broad term. You may be self-defined and genetically a man and identify with a V because you have a partner who's a woman, or daughters or sisters, or something where you just want to learn. You're welcome to come to Tribe Called V. Now, with all that said, I also want to address other biases that we just don't even realize. A few weeks ago, I may have mentioned this in one of my stories, I gave a talk about ovarian cancer, as I do a lot. It was actually a talk about fear and removing the word fear and using language and being proactive about your health and your mindset. And in the discussion, I used an example that many of us as gynecologists do, which is when we're trying to encourage humans with ovaries and women to understand their body, especially with regard to ovarian cancer, we will say that we need to avoid delaying diagnoses. And one of those ways is to encourage women to understand that if they have bloating or pain or pressure that lasts more than 2 weeks, they should address it. Because by and large, what has been shown in the data is that when women have bloating, pain, or pressure, they tend to blow it off for a period of time, and that period of time tends to be 6 to 8 months, which is why ovarian cancer tends to get diagnosed at stage 3 or 4, as opposed to stage 1 and 2. And why is that? Largely because as women, we tolerate things and we justify things. And so a common explanation that we as gynecologists use to belie this point to you as people we're trying to inform and educate is that the example is, a woman will think, oh, I ate too much Chinese food, I drank too much wine, that's why I'm bloated. Now, I meant it, of course. My intent was in innocence. My intent was to show that when some of us eat certain foods, we feel bloated, and then we blow off our symptoms when in fact we shouldn't, because sometimes it's not the food we've eaten. My impact was actually very hurtful, because someone in the audience who was a Chinese American very kindly and very graciously sent me a message and noted that when I said that, it had the impact of maligning Chinese food, which has had a long history, as you know, and a recent history, as you know, of being maligned for reasons that are not the fault of the people who make Chinese food, because when they authentically make Chinese food, it doesn't tend to have a lot of the preservatives that we tend to use in American Chinese food. MSG has really been debunked as anything that was problematic. So there was a lot behind what she said, and it was very gentle and caring in the way she said it to me. And I really tried hard not to become defensive. I'm sure I felt a little defensive, if I'm being honest, but I tried to really remind myself that these are biases. These are biases that I have without realizing. Now, many of you might be listening saying, there's nothing wrong with you saying that. I mean, Chinese food does make a lot of people bloated, and that might be true. And for me, frankly, pasta makes me bloated, as does Persian rice, right? So complex processed carbohydrates tend to make me bloated, as does soy sauce. That doesn't change the fact that in the current climate that we are living, there has been a huge amount of anti-Asian rhetoric, hate, and crimes. And so we have to be really careful of that. Nothing is kind of in a vacuum. We can't say that like, oh, what, now I can't say, you know, that I can't eat chocolate because someone who produces cocoa is going to be offended. The answer is yeah, you probably could, because no one who produces cocoa is going to be offended, because people who produce cocoa are not having crimes against them. But right now, there's anti-Asian crime, and there has been a long history of that is pervasive. And so, as opposed to really getting defensive, I tried to clamp down my defense and really listen and really try to reflect and think, do I really need to say Chinese food is what makes me bloated when I try to educate and inform women? No, I don't. I can discuss bloating, even with regard to food, in a way that does not hurt other people. Now, was that my intent? No. Was that my impact? Yes. Same thing with language when we're talking about women versus humans with ovaries. It doesn't take anything away from me to refer to humans with ovaries as humans with ovaries, nor does it take anything away if I also refer to them as women sometimes, if that's what they choose to be called. So I will kind of blanket statement, try to interchange both so that I make people feel welcome. It doesn't take anything away from me for me to change my little language about bloating and not say bloating because of Chinese food, because even though I did not mean to cause harm, it inflicted a bit of harm. And that is, I mean, above all, what I don't want. So I say this on a Friday afternoon, as I'm waiting for some more babies to come out, that we can all do better. And we can do better without ego, without arrogance, and without disdain. When someone might point out to you that something you have done has caused them or someone else angst, it's okay. It doesn't mean you were bad. I don't think it meant I was bad. I think that she really knew I didn't have any intent, and the way she delivered the whatever we want to call it, critique, criticism, whatever, was really, truly beautiful and kind. So I'm grateful to her for pointing something out that I would not have known. I'm sorry that I did say or do anything that would have caused any kind of sadness for anyone. I'm sure I've done it before. I don't even know it. I'm sure it's happened and people haven't pointed it out to me, either because they thought I wouldn't take the news well, or because they didn't want to bother, or because they questioned whether or not they even had the right. And that's too bad. We can do this kindly and gently, and we can all evolve and do better. So I hope that all makes sense. Goodbye.